Let's open up the vintage collection figure of Morgan Elsbeth from the Ahsoka series VC295.
Villa Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it.
Hello there, thanks for visiting Villa Varykino. I recently completed a rewatch of the Ahsoka live action series and it reminded me just how much I love the character of Morgan Elsbeth in that show. And of course, Morgan Elsbeth was recently added as a playable character to one of my favorite mobile app games, Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. So those two events reminded me that I still have my vintage collection carded figure of Morgan Elsbeth from the Ahsoka series still on her card. I am slowly opening up my figures from this show and building a bit of a loose display scene. It's definitely time to get her off the backing card so I can add this very important character to my Ahsoka action figure display. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll get the action figure out of the bubble. We can go through all of the details, but first let's take one last look at the packaging. As a collector, I absolutely love the packaging for the vintage collection line, and I find that for some figures I just have to leave them on their backing card for a while before I feel, shall we say, emotionally ready to open them up. So this one came out a little while ago, but I feel like I'm finally ready to open it up. They just look so great on their vintage Kenner style backing cards. For the Ahsoka series, we have this really cool, unique Ahsoka series logo here at the top and the single chrome racetrack surrounding the character image here. For Morgan Elsbeth, we have this really interesting teal color behind the character name there in white text and behind the carded figure there. The promo image here on the side isn't a screen grab from the show. It is an actual sort of still promotional image. And I have to say, I think the pose is perhaps a little bit unusual. She has a clenched right hand and her left hand is just kind of held open. She's not holding anything. We know that she has a very distinctive weapon in the show. Obviously, I guess they were trying to avoid spoilers. She is not holding anything. I am expecting, if you have seen the show, I won't go into any spoilers, I am expecting a second version of Morgan Elsbeth where she does have the weapon that she does wield in the show. So fingers crossed we'll eventually get that one. We can see this one. No accessories. She does have a soft goods skirt though. I think this one's going to look really cool out of the packaging. Of course, as usual, we have the Kenner logo down the bottom here. I will say this one was hard to find in New Zealand. You might be able to see that mine has a little bit of a cut in the side here. And normally this would sort of mean that I would perhaps not pick this one up. I'd look for a better example. This was one of the very few I ever spotted. This one in particular sold very well. So I knew I was going to be opening it, so I didn't mind too much about that weird sort of cut error there on the side. Moving on to the back, we've got now the slightly older version of the vintage collection of backing card style with the black ones, with the preview images there of some of the other figures from the range. We can see them there, and this one is VC295. We also have the vintage collection logo there with the double chrome racetrack surrounding those preview images, and the rest of it is just barcode, copyright, all of that kind of stuff there on the back. It's probably not exactly one of my most favorite backing cards, but I do still like it. It's a nice clear image, you know, she wears a darker color skirt here, so we do get just a lot of sort of not as much detail on the lower half of the image, but that is of course true to her costume. Hasbro can't do that much about it. Perhaps maybe a little bit of a zoom in might have helped there. I do like sort of the stone background here, but overall I am kind of not too worried about perhaps getting a second carded example. I am going to keep my backing card, but I'm definitely finally ready to open this one up. Now I have the Morgan Elsbeth 3.75 inch figure out of the packaging so we can go over all of the details. Now she doesn't have any accessories, so we'll just be looking at the figure. I do have the Black Series version of Morgan Elsbeth from the Ahsoka series for a little bit of comparison because there are some interesting differences between the two versions. Of course, they're both made by Hasbro, so I'm always curious about why they do things differently between the two formats. Starting out with the face, and this is where I see one of the big differences between the two figures, and I'll start with the vintage collection figure here first. Now that I have the figure out of the packaging, I can really see the technique they have used for her hair. I like the fact that they have sculpted the hair as a separate piece to the face, so we can really get some fine detail on these pieces of hair hanging down the side of the face, something that's really hard to do well if it's all just sculpted as one piece. piece. I really like the paint apps on the face. The sculpting really does look like the actress. It looks like the character. We've got some really tiny details there. That small marking on her forehead is really nice and tidy, and I really like the face details there, the eyes, eyebrows, and the accent on the lips there as well. If you are familiar with the character of Morgan Elsbeth, she has really interesting two-tone hair, mostly sort of a whitish grey blonde hair depending on lighting, and she has dark roots that you can see because her hair is sort of pulled back, so they generally frame around the face. Looking at this vintage collection figure, they have gone with a bit of sort of a wash, a weathering approach along the sort of the front of her hair that we can sort of see that really accents the sculpting of the hair, and then it just kind of stops here. And we can really see it on this side here where we can see that that sort of wash fits along that hairline. So because it does follow the hairstyle, it's not too jarring, but it's not entirely accurate. I do like the sculpting here. We've got the two buns and the way that the sort of braids wrap around the base. She has a really complicated hairstyle. I like that sort of braiding, the sort of French style braid across the top. But if I grab the Black Series figure, we can see the way that they did the hair, especially the painting of it, very, very differently. So if I just pop this one down for a minute, we can see that they were a lot more accurate with those dark sort of hairline colors there, fading into the colors at the back. And I know that the painting detail is not going to be the same between the two figures. The scales are very different, but I just think it's a little bit of a shame that they weren't just a little bit more accurate with those sort of darker roots around the front. They've just gone with a much more simpler wash over those front sections of hair. It's a little bit of a shame because I do really like the effect on the Black Series figure there. Just the way that that really comes in there. Moving on down, of course, Morgan Elsbeth is primarily a soft goods sort of fabric character. She doesn't wear hard armor pieces, so I do like the fact that Hasbro has chosen to do a soft goods skirt for the bottom. I know that's always a popular choice for these long skirts rather than plastic because we still get the articulation usable underneath. If you have a full plastic skirt all the way to the ankles or the boots, it just means that you're not really going to be able to move the legs much. Not that she does as much sort of fighting we've certainly got no weapons, so it's a little bit hard to do sort of like interesting action poses when you don't have weapons to kind of help guide those poses like lightsabers or anything like that. So for me personally, I don't think I'm going to be posing her very sort of action style, but I do like the fact that we've got soft goods here. For the top, as we usually find with sort of fabric character costumes, it is all plastic up the top here, and it is sort of a simple Night Sister inspired look with this sort of dark burgundy tunic. Now she does have a lot of sort of fabric wrapping in this undershirt, and it looks like for this piece that it is actually a separate piece. You can see that we've got some separation between this sort of tunic part here in the front and the outer sort of vest part. There is quite a sort of a seam line here. So there's quite a difference between the sculpting and the paintwork. We've got sort of this accent red striping paint there to sort of really highlight all of those pieces. And I think it's really interesting that it wasn't just all one piece. This is sort of crafted in separate components. So we've got a really nice definition there of the pieces, which I really like. We've got a fairly simple sort of a wrapping pattern down her arms. And then we've got a bit more of a brighter red, similar to the accent color here, down by the wrists on both sides. That one covers the back of the hand, again on the side as well. Just kind of all really pulls together. And she's got a wide dark colored belt. Here it's a little hard to tell if this is a black or a really dark brown. Certainly reads sort of one way or the other depending on the lighting that I put her in. And we've got a small little metallic sort of buckle detail there off to the side as well. That is sculpted, it is raised, and they've accented that with, I think it's gold under this light. That looks gold. So overall, the top part of her costume doesn't have a lot going on, but of course that has to be accurate to what we see on screen. And I really like the references to the Night Sisters with the sort of the wrapping and the bandage style outfit there. Pretty plain on the back, absolutely nothing there. but again, that is going to be accurate to her costume on screen, not Hasbro's fault there. So if we move down to the soft goods skirt, I really like this. Sometimes when it comes to certain figures, I would rather they do it in plastic, but I've got to say this is one of the best soft goods decisions that I've seen in the vintage collection line for a while. So we can see it's really sort of subtle on the backing card art, but Morgan Elsbeth's skirt is very dark and has all these little red sort of little dashes in a pattern, and Hasbro has actually found or created fabric that has that same similar pattern. The scale of the pattern is probably perhaps a little bit larger on action figure scale here than it would be, you know, if we sort of scaled it to the pattern of the fabric of the original costume, but I think it works really well. I can see the black fabric and it's got all these sort of little dark red little lines there, and you will be able to see that the whole thing has been sort of crinkled, in which you can really see here, which is just absolutely fantastic. To be honest, I wasn't really expecting them to do that for her character. I was on a small scale. That's really impressive. If you've ever tried to sort of create these pleats by ironing fabric, that takes a lot of time. I know that commercially they do it with machines. You don't need to do it by hand, but that's just a really impressive detail for such a small scale figure. Even more so when we compare it to, sorry, just some fluff there, especially if I compare it to the Black Series figure. So popping the vintage collection one down. For the Black Series, we have a plastic skirt, and you will notice that there is absolutely no red detail lines painted on this. Considering that this figure doesn't come with any accessories like the smaller version, this is how she came, exactly the same outfit. I would have loved to have seen this one with the soft goods fabric skirt of this one. They could have even used the same fabrics and just created the skirt out of this fabric. I think that would have been amazing, because this is just kind of like this, I don't know, it looks dark brown, maybe black, again, depending on the light. They did it in sections, so she does have some posability. It's not just a big plastic column, but somehow the lack of that sort of red patterned detail to the fabric is really striking, especially when you compare it to this one. Now, generally speaking, a larger scale figure lets you include more detail that would simply get lost on a smaller scale. Sometimes when you sort of shrink things down to the original 3.75 inch scale, it's just too small, so you kind of end up sort of eliminating tiny details. But we would expect to see it in the larger 6-inch line. And I think it's really sort of fascinating that there's absolutely no printing on this. Perhaps it was too hard on this pleated plastic, but then they clearly have the fabric to use to create that effect on the smaller figure. Why didn't they use it on this one? I think it's such a shame, because I do really like this figure. I think it's a good representation of her. I absolutely love the hair. The face sculpt is amazing. But now that I've got my hands on this amazing soft goods skirt, this plastic one is just, it's just a little bit more like a toy. And it seems a little bit of a shame that the lack of that red patterning on the 6 inches is really standing out to me now. I know I wasn't supposed to be reviewing the Black Series in this video, but it kind of ended up being a little bit of a comparison there. So again, I absolutely love the soft goods cloak here. We can see that it has a side seam here and there again. So it's the two sections. You can kind of see the seams here just tucked in very nicely there on either side. It hides pretty well. We can kind of see the joins a little bit, but overall, I'm just really impressed with the accuracy. They've got the sort of the little pleats there, the fabric pattern. It's just absolutely fantastic what they were able to achieve in the 3.75 inch scale. And I think that this version really wins out, even though the hair, I do like the Black Series version of the hair just a little bit with that sort of darker sort of ombre effect with the dark roots bleeding into the paler color towards the back. So because this is probably done with either a chemical or somehow sort of the way that they commercially do the pleating, this sort of stuff does tend to lose its shape because fabric naturally just wants to be flat. So I am going to be very careful with how much I stretch this out, because it's not like a spring. You keep stretching it out, it won't always snap back into this beautiful pleated shape. So I want to keep that because I think that that looks really nice. It's also going to start to widen if I start distorting that pleating. But I do want to go over the articulation of her legs because, of course, the soft goods means that we can move the legs. So I'm going to very carefully see if I can sort of flip the skirt back a little bit so that we can still keep the shape looking nice, but we can check out under the legs. So we've got pretty plain sculpted legs underneath. Of course, we don't really see under her skirt on the show. It's basically like a dark version of the sort of the bandage, the wrapping style Night Sister sort of fabrics that we have down her sleeves, down her legs, but all this one dark plastic color. Absolutely no paint apps here. I do really like the sculpting. It's kind of simple, but of course they would be the leggings that she's wearing underneath. Very simple little boots here out to the bottom. We can see we've got some nice articulation. We've got the hips, the top of the thighs, the knees and the ankles. So we can really get a lot of articulation because of course no plastic there on the lower half of the body. So we can get all of the kind of the movement that we would hope to get from a figure. She can do all sorts of sitting poses. And it's kind of a shame that she doesn't have any accessories. I'm hoping that we will get another version of her that we see in those final moments of the Ahsoka series where she gets that unique weapon. She gets a little bit of an update to her look. I'm really hoping we get to that version of her. So really happy with the articulation underneath. Of course, the soft goods means that we can fully utilize those. And that would be an interesting lower half of this figure for customizing because it's got really not too much detail underneath there and all the similar sort of articulation points that we would hope to have on a figure. I know the recent re-release of the New Hope Princess Leia. I absolutely love that figure, and she has sort of a plastic skirt which does restrict her legs, but in that case the top of the sort of costume and the bottom are the same. I think why I liked the plastic skirt on that Leia figure. I wasn't bothered by the fact that the bottom wasn't fabric and sort of having a plastic top. On this one, I really like the soft goods skirt because it is a completely different fabric. So you already do get a contrast between the two. When you do a plastic top and a white soft goods fabric for Leia, it feels like two different fabrics, whereas I know it is a dress, it's all the same thing, but that's just my sort of comparison between those two figures. I know that I wasn't fussed about the soft goods on that Leia figure. I absolutely love it here. Just the detail that we just wouldn't get if this was just like black plastic. We would probably not have those red dotted lines like the Black series. Perhaps Hasbro just can't sort of print this pattern on sort of rippled plastic, so we simply don't get it on the Black series figure, whereas they can do it as a printed fabric. This is just absolutely fantastic. Kind of really makes up for the fact that she doesn't have any accessories. We've got just this really good detail element to her as a figure. I know it's kind of weird seeing in the modern era when it's accurate to have a figure with no accessories. I know back in the day, you know, so we got some quirky accessories with some of those characters that didn't really need accessories. We had all sorts of, you know, pointing sticks and lunch boxes and massive weapons for characters that didn't hold any weapons. So, you know, we don't need just made up toy accessories, especially in the vintage collection line. I know that if we got characters like this in some of the more toy lines, like the Epic Hero series, they'd probably get some oversized blasters or jetpacks or all sorts of sort of fun toy playable accessories. But yeah, I don't mind that she doesn't come with one. I think it's interesting that Hasbro chose to do this Ahsoka version of Morgan Elsbeth first rather than her appearance from the Mandalorian series where she does wield the Beskar spear. So I think it's kind of interesting that we didn't get like a version of her with a spear accessory first, that we could just sort of take that figure and put her in an Ahsoka Ahsoka series display that they gave us an Ahsoka series version first. So that's kind of fun if you want to collect specifically the Ahsoka series backing cards, because I like to collect them up from each individual series. We have a lot of figures from the Mandalorian series, so I am excited that Hasbro decided to release Morgan Elsbeth on an Ahsoka series backing card. She's definitely more prominent in that series, and I like to see more figures from the Ahsoka series. Having just recently rewatched it, there are still lots of characters from the show that I want in the 3.75 inch action figure line, and this one is just really, really cool. It was kind of surprising for us here in New Zealand. This particular vintage collection, Morgan Elsbeth, disappeared off store shelves. This was the one that I saw. I never found her anywhere else. As a comparison, the Black series has become a peg warmer, sadly, in New Zealand. And I do have to wonder, is that because of the skirt? Is it because she doesn't have accessories? There were a lot of her, so I just thought, you know, a lot of the other Black series figures that came out in the same way from the Ahsoka series sold very well, but not the Morgan Elsbeth, not here in New Zealand, whereas this version sold very, very quickly. It's just kind of interesting to see, you know, and I thought it was interesting, I'll just pop it down for a minute, that this was one of the rare instances for us here in New Zealand. We had both versions, the Black Series 6 inch and the Vintage Collection 3.75 inch, were on the store shelves at the same time. And it's kind of weird that Hasbro did both versions of this particular character so close together, when I think about so many other characters that I'm still waiting for that have come out in one of these lines and not the other. When I'm thinking about, say, Baylan Skull and Shin Hati that are in the Black Series line and not the TVC yet, or the Bad Batch. Honestly, that is like one of the things that always jumps out at me. We got a huge array of Bad Batch characters in the Black Series line. We still cannot complete the Bad Batch in the Vintage Collection line, and that's something I'm really sad about. Now that the show was aired, I don't know if we're ever really going to be able to get there. Sometimes Hasbro doesn't seem too keen to jump back and make a lot of characters from slightly older shows and movies. But anyway, that's a few thoughts about Hasbro and some of their recent decisions. This video is about the Morgan Elsbeth Vintage Collection figure, and I absolutely love her. She doesn't have any flaws on my particular figure. That's always a plus, especially when I had to just grab the one that I found. Minor cutting flaw on the backing card, but of course now that she's out, I'm never going to really notice or care about the backing card. It's going to get filed away in my collection, and this one is going to go on a display. I think she's absolutely fantastic. Just that minor little note about the hair, it could have been just a little bit more accurate, having that sort of darker hairline rather than using the wash, but I know it is a small scale, and from the front she looks fantastic. I really like all of those fine details on the face. I like the fact that the paint here doesn't sort of bleed over into areas that it shouldn't be, because we've got those really sort of sharp sort of sculpting lines between the under tunic and the outer one. Just fantastic. I don't even really need to play around with her arms much. I know I didn't really test out her articulation on her arms because I don't have anything to really put in them. If I put her arms up, we do have the shoulders of her tunic sort of extending a little bit there, so it does impact her arms' ability to go all the way dead straight like a T, but she doesn't hold anything, so I don't feel like I'm really going to need to sort of test out anything. I can't test to see how well her hands are going to hold anything. She both hands are sort of a classic C grip. She doesn't hold blasters. She certainly doesn't come with a blaster accessory, so she doesn't have an extended trigger finger on her right hand like many characters do. And because she doesn't have any armor or any kind of bulky sculpting details, she's got very slender arms, which are generally very easy to articulate. You know, there's nothing really impacting the freedom of movement. I do feel like I need to open up one of my Mandalorian figures, get a Beskar spear, and sort of test out to see how well she would look holding that particular accessory. I don't have one open to test right now, but I can see that we can probably get her arms into a reasonable position. A little bit tight against the body because of the way the tunic sort of creates that V. That's about as close in to the arms. I can't get them sort of completely flat down, but I can get some good sort of movement here with the arms. They come up about that high, and I can sort of rotate them in. So I'm sure I could get her holding onto a spear reasonably well. But overall, she's a cool figure. A little bit simpler. I know these ones don't always prove to be the most exciting. No accessories to really talk about. Not too much in the way of posing, but I really like her. She was such a cool character. I was really excited that we got a little bit more of her story in the Tales of the Empire animated short series, because I think she's just a really fascinating character, and I'm really happy that I finally have both versions of her for my action figure collection, the vintage collection and the larger scale black series. So there you go. That was a little bit of an adventure unboxing another vintage collection figure for my collection. It's always fun to just sort of hang out and chat about Star Wars and collecting. I always have a lot of fun opening up another new figure for my collection. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I sort of chatted for a while. Thank you so much again for hanging out with me. I really do appreciate the time you take to hang out with me opening up Star Wars toys. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon or evening wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a TVC fan, I also opened up the Professor Hu Yang 3.75-inch figure. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole vintage collection playlist. This is the way.